I'm Erin Harrison coming to you from Cloud Expo in Santa Clara, California. And I'm joined today by Jake Sorofman, who is the CMO of rPath. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you very much, Erin.
Thanks for being here. So to get us started, tell us what cloud means to rPath.
Oh, so that's a big question, but what cloud really means, I think, to rPath and the market in general is agility and responsiveness. There's a lot of ways you could look at cloud, but I think that's the most strategic benefit that cloud affords. It's the ability for IT to become more responsive to lines of business, provide a way to make IT services available for self-service consumption on an on-demand basis, and to remove this bottleneck that has traditionally has existed between lines of business and IT. Today it could take 3 to 6 months to deploy a new workload into production within large enterprises. And the reality is that with public cloud services like Amazon EC2, someone can swipe a credit card and deploy a workload in 15 minutes. That's really shining a light on the dysfunction in traditional IT delivery models and forcing IT to think differently about how they're going to meet the needs of business. And two things are going to happen if they don't make this transformation to think about cloud as the basis of their delivery model going forward. The first is that applications will leak to the public cloud. We're already seeing evidence of this today, where rogue applications are following the path of least resistance to public cloud services. And secondly, it's just holding CIOs to a higher standard. So traditionally, their performance has been measured based on incremental performance improvement year over year. Just make sure that the curve moves high and right, incrementally year over year. Today they're being asked to do something dramatically different and to really transform service levels from months to minutes. That's really the opportunity around cloud and what it means for enterprises.
And how I think CIOs are definitely being charged with doing more with less. So how is cloud helpful in this new tasks that they're being charged with?
That's a great question, and that's really the second dimension of cloud is cost. So how do you address increasing demands around scale and speed without adding people resources? In fact, we're seeing a lot of IT organizations that have declining OpEx budgets, increasing expectations for speed, increasing scale, and increasing change. And the only way you can meet those objectives is through deep automation and self-service delivery of IT services. So to the extent that you've automated your services and you have that level of industrialized automation in place, and you define clear policies for driving that automation, then you can remove the human factor around the delivery of IT services, have IT refocus around adding higher levels of value to the business through new innovation and definition of policies, and put control in the hands of internal customers.
Okay, great. And let's talk a little bit about some of the architectural changes that have to happen.
That's a great question. So we see it as really three things at the highest level. You need a self-service delivery model, which is to say an abstraction layer that enables internal customers, lines of business, and other technical audiences like dev and test organizations to consume their own infrastructure and application services on demand. So you need that storefront that you present to those internal audiences. The second thing you need is deep automation. You need to standardize your software infrastructure, you need to make it available for reuse, and ensure that it's still centrally managed by IT organizations. So they're defining the bits that they're putting in the hands of their internal customers, managing it centrally within a repository. The third thing that you need is elasticity, the ability to provision and deprovision workloads on demand and to scale them elastically based on variations in demand. The last thing you need is the ability to decouple your workloads from their deployment environment. So you have the ability to retarget workloads as circumstances dictate. So ultimately the CIO wants the flexibility to redeploy a workload to an internal or external environment, whether that's physical, virtual, or cloud, based on optimizations for price, optimizations for policy, or optimizations for performance, or perhaps a life cycle stage. You may decide that you're going to use Amazon EC2 for dev and test workloads, but you want to have your production workloads running on an internal elastic infrastructure like Eucalyptus, for example.
Okay. So that brings me to another question, which is, how has IT delivery changed with the onset of cloud?
I think it's changing. I think it's very much a work in process. We see it following an arc that really begins with agile operations, applying new tools and techniques to increase IT velocity and increase IT responsiveness. So finding ways to address the speed and scale requirements of IT today based on an existing sort of as-is IT delivery model. The second phase is taking some level of your IT infrastructure and applications and making them available on a self-service basis, and putting control in the hands of your internal customers and removing the bottleneck of traditional delivery models. And then finally, adding elasticity and adding elasticity in terms of how services are provisioned, how they're consumed, and how they're billed, how they're paid for. And ultimately, that's IT as a service. That's the terminus of this evolution in this journey. And each of the steps that I mentioned, agile operations, self-service IT, and ultimately private and hybrid cloud, are an entry point and a step along the way. So depending on where a company is in their maturity, they may choose to start with automation versus more strategic approach to redefining their IT delivery model. Ultimately, they need to get there over time, and it's going to be based on their appetite for making that transformation and their readiness to make that transformation.
Sure, okay. And we were talking earlier about this new coalition of independent vendors, so tell me more about that.
Yeah, so everything we've been talking about is really the motivation for the partnership that we put together. It's called the NRE Alliance. NRE stands for New Scale, rPath, and Eucalyptus. And we're providing the foundations for making this transformation to IT as a service. Self-service through New Scale's IT storefront, deep automation with rPath's Service Factory, and then ultimately elasticity with the Eucalyptus internal cloud fabric. And the combination of those three technologies represent, we think, the foundations for the new IT delivery model.
Okay, great. And one last question, as we move into 2011, do you see standards coming anytime soon? Is that something that you guys are talking about?
It's a great question. So ultimately, these are early days for cloud computing, and you're seeing active working groups forming around standards today. The conversations are taking place, which is great. I think it's going to be some time before you start seeing industry-accepted standards. Today, we're starting to see de facto standards emerging. The Amazon API is a great example of that. That is, by all accounts, the de facto standard for cloud infrastructure just by virtue of critical mass of users and development skills around it. So as we start gaining experience with these technologies, I think we'll start seeing a rationalization around where those standards should lie. So it will be, today, conversations and really starting to figure out what needs to be standardized. You'll see little bits of de facto standards emerging. The APIs from Amazon, for example, the OVF format from the DMTF is a good example of what's becoming a de facto standard for application packaging. And then finally, we'll see bona fide industry standards emerge, but that's going to take a matter of time.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jake.
Thank you very much.
I've been speaking with Jake Sorofman, who is the CMO of rPath, and I'm Erin Harrison, coming to you from Santa Clara at Cloud Expo.